Hello everybody, this will be my first more so commentary video for SMITE, and I wanted to talk more so about the state of SMITE today. I've been watching a couple of videos and talking to a couple of Discord servers about, the overall shenanigans, good, bad things that are happening with SMITE and its current development in its prolonged beta at the moment. I want to say that most of the State of Smite videos at the moment, for most people, are focused on conquest and other things like that. I actually just want to talk about the game more generally, and even things outside of like actually playing the game, like when we're in just the gods tab and we're messing around with specific gods and the god builder and so on and so forth and looking at abilities. And the first thing I want to bring up is that a lot of gods tool tabs, ability tooltips, descriptions are all messed up. And I think the best example of this is Artio. So as you can see, I'm not making this up, I'm clicking through. Artio's tool tab is blank. Blank. Her ultimate on her non-aspect is blank. We are so many patches past Artio. I'm actually going to go look up what patch number she was. So we are currently on open beta 37, and each patch is 2 weeks. Artio was released 7 months ago in open beta 24, and her tooltips are blank. Now, obviously, we can go to Smite 1, and we can look up the wikis for them, and we can figure out all the things. Or we can go into, jungle practice, and we can figure out certain things for, what they look like, what they do, rough experimentation. And I think this is probably one of the stupidest things in here, and I actually want to go check Cerberus out, if Cerberus is still wrong. Okay, so they did fix this. So for the longest time, this just, imagine, I don't remember what the beginning one was, but this used to be 17 at the maximum. And for the longest time, it apparently was 13, and they never fixed it, so they actually did fix this. But there are various gods like Artio, where the tooltips just aren't correct. The other big thing that they just fixed this patch, that I know they just fixed this patch because it didn't work correctly, is, say for instance, when you go to a god builder, there are some people who straight up just use this when you like lock in a new favorite, you pin your god to the store, and you use this as your overall layout. These, for the longest time, did not go in the correct order. They went in just the default order that the game picks. I don't know how it does, but it normally just picks them. And so this patch, they just made it so that if you go to accessibility, assists, and auto scale, if you turn this on, it will actually represent what you find in God Builder when you go through this. And here's another bug, this thing, where it duplicates your build for no reason. It's the same build, as you can see. Another thing on God Builder, as you can see, it says that at the end of this, I should have 97 and 125 for physical and magical protection. Okay, that is wildly off, because this item alone gives 40 of each, and it's saying that we're only getting 15 here and 65 here when we have this many, items. So there's all sorts of things like this wrong. So like if I go to practice, and I gotta put myself to level 20 and all that jazz. So if I go do that final build that was just there, as you can see, I don't have roughly 100 and 125. I have 285 and 240, just rounding the numbers for simplicity. And this is, in my opinion, unacceptable. unacceptable. When it comes to god builders and stuff like this, obviously the percentile increase and the passives on certain abilities, like for instance Draconic Scale, just don't work. Like it wouldn't make sense to put it in a god builder over here. So they just fixed this, which was a huge issue for all the game modes that I play, because unless I'm playing a game where I know I need to hard counter someone, I'll turn off auto skill, because for the most part I use the same auto skills. There are only exceptions to this on certain gods I play, but that's irrelevant to this. But these were my biggest gripes, were that if you went and you looked at certain abilities, like for instance on Horus, this is an incomplete passive. What it's supposed to say is 4 plus 0.8 per level. So that way, at level 20, you get 4 plus 16, which equals 20. And so at max stacks, which is 10, which it doesn't say, it just says they have a maximum, you get 200, 20 times 10. So they need to add these things. These are not hard to update. I don't know how these keep falling through. Like with Artio, there is no feasible reason that for 7 months this is literally blank and no one has talked about this. I know Artio gets played a lot because she's one of the like top 5 current solo laners in the game and has been for many patches, just because she has so much utility, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that hers are blank is insane to me. Now, I want to turn my attention more so to god balancing, because that was also brought up in Deathwalker's video. So the current philosophy of the high-res devs is that they release gods more powerful than they should be. They overtune them purposefully. It helps with the god launch. However, most of the god launches, the gods have been so overpowered or buggy that it makes playing the game ridiculous. And the 2 most recent ones that I can think of are Atlas Aspect and Bastet. So Bastet is, I don't remember if she got hotfixed already and they gave her like a 20 to 30% nerf. But regardless, she currently has a bug with Barb Carver where in her non-aspect, if she hits you with the ult, so she releases the cats and they do their dash effect, each cat counts as a new ability. So Barb Carver stacks on every single dash hit. And essentially, you know, with one item, Bastet and Sandadude show this in his video, that you can one-shot Titan the moment that it spawns with one item. Instantly. It's not something you can normally do in Duel. With Atlas Aspect, which they did fix, they absolutely nerfed this shit into the ground. It was just literally playing a giant minefield that there was no counterplay to. There was none. And the same could be said with, where is he? So with Tsukiyomi, both in his aspect and without his aspects on his base kit, he was released so overpowered that if he 2-hit you, so he used his stun, and then he hit you with the extra attack, it did not matter if you had 200 to 300 protections, you were just dead. Like as soon as he had a couple items, you were just dead. With X-Ball, it was more so the aspect. Where is X-Ball? So with S-Ball aspect, what it was is his darts were horrendously overpowered to the point that he didn't even have to hit like a combo or anything on you. He just had to hit 1 or 2 darts. And in his aspect, that basically meant you were dead. And for me, a guy who mainly plays Warriors and Guardians, you know, the big tanky boys, the fact that it doesn't matter if I have damage mitigation on top of having 200 plus prots by mid to late game, if I'm just dead as a tank, that's beyond ridiculous. So the whole thing with X-Ball and all that, Tsukiyomi, nah, it's beyond crazy. Same thing happened with Nua with her aspect. They found ways to exploit it with crit and all sorts of other things. they messed up Pele's aspect. So Pele's aspect, they basically made it where originally the damage wasn't the issue. The issue was she was really tanky and she had a little bit of damage. And what people did is they found ways to exploit her sustainability by buying a little bit of damage. And I saw a lot of this watching Intersex streams for me, which are in the morning. For him, they're a little later. For him, he would face Nika, who is often playing Pele aspect. And I've said this since the beginning. The way to fix the aspect is not to make it so that the aspect isn't tanky. The way to fix it is if you go to these abilities to make it so that the strength scaling is either 0 or very low, like 20% or lower. And what they keep doing instead is they keep messing with her 3 and how she gets her fuel. So I've put this in the server before that I've been in with for all sorts of Smite stuff. I have a game with her where I have 56,000 self-healing in a 25-minute game where I mitigate 217,000 damage in arena. This is no longer possible. And in that game, I don't do anything crazy. I do like maybe 40k damage. That's it. In an arena game, high damage is like 60k plus. So I'm doing fine for like a warrior-esque type character. The problem is they nerfed the healing. They nerfed the heal scaling. They changed how much fuel you get. This is actually incorrect. This is wrong. That should say 6, I believe. And they made it so that item procs did not or no longer proc fuel gain. So it doesn't count as an additional point of damage that they're taking from a god source. So they have made what originally was a really good tank aspect be virtually dog shit. And I will argue with anyone who tells me that this aspect is viable against any sort of mid to late game damage comp because they have completely ruined the sustainability. Now, don't get me wrong. They fixed a couple of bugs where apparently her 3 was double hitting for damage. Her little AoE of that heals her, but the damage on it apparently was double stacking. It already doesn't trigger items, as it says. That'd be kind of ridiculous. But yeah, they completely destroyed this character, at least aspect-wise. Her base kit is virtually untouched. Her base kit's B tier. But in terms of being a tank, like playing her kind of like a warrior or like an actual tank with CC, no. This aspect has been completely shot. No reason to play it. And I will hard defend that statistically. I can actually break down the numbers of how weak this character is. I can completely back that up with statistical analysis. Like if somebody wants to come in here and tell me, no, she's still crazy in solo lane. No. No, she's not. Not at all. She's not at all. Because the people who play, or the characters that get played in mid, in ADC, and jungle, now have such an advantage over this character because they've essentially halved the healing already. Now they have halved the fuel gain, so you don't even have as much to heal from. And on top of that, they nerfed her base stats and her percent scaling on everything. So in terms of a character, Pele aspect is bad. It's in my opinion, it's actually worse than her base kit now, which is a very sad thing to say. You could still play her if you want, but you're gonna have to play her like a total bitch now. You straight up can't act like a wall where you can sustain through damage. You used to be able to do that. You could buy something like Phoenix Feather and Yogis and Resolute Mantle, and maybe I don't know. Maybe buy Bluestone and Gauntlet and some other damage items. Be health with a little bit of protections. You can't do that anymore. You just have to do the standard solo lane build where you have, prophetic, some form of damage item, I would say, for her to either be glad she had a Rune Forge, and then you just have the standard percentile mitigation stacking, and then maybe you have Resolute Mantle or some sort of flex item. But this character is gone. This character is gone, and I don't want to rant on her. I just know that of all the aspects in the game, this is the one I was the most happy when I saw it. Yes, it was overpowered in solo lane. However, they took the wrong approach to fix, as I've just laid out. They should have just messed with the damage, not the healing, and so on and so on. Other aspects, like Scylla's aspect, are really, really good. I don't play a lot of Scylla, but I actually enjoy watching people play Scylla now because you can actually play her as a viable support. She's not bad. She has CC, she has a whole bunch of mobility, she has utility, and she's hard to hit. You know, and then you just have OP gods that are always OP gods, and then they have absolute dog shit aspects that I don't know why anyone would ever use Aspect Sobic, and it has become like a meme in the Smite community that if you're playing Aspect Sobic, you're like, oh, this guy's just gonna fucking troll. That's exactly what it is. And then they do totally random buffs that make no sense to Odin, where they give his shield while it's up now. That it does this. And also, it still doesn't tell you what this duration is. It doesn't say the duration. There is no duration listed for this shield. So that's another tooltip they got to fix. I want to say let's go more sort of items. Let's just mess with the build real quick. When it comes to items, in terms of damage items, there are others down here, but they're not anything too crazy. The big issue right now for tanks is the fact that you can go on ADCs. You can go Avenging Blade. You can go Executioner and Titan's Bane. If you buy those 3 items and say the person gets healed somewhat, it's 5% of their health, nothing crazy. If you have all 3 of these and you hit 3 autos, that god has minus 51% of their prots, and on top of that, you have 35% pen. So when you look at really big tanks, like for instance, I have a game where I played as a Hercules, and there was a late game Medusa who bought this. I think she also bought that, but later sold it. But they also had Oathsworn too. And I had, at the end of the game, close to 400 prots with damage mitigation. I had an Oni's Hunter Garb, so I had 12% damage mitigation because there was another magical person on the team. This Medusa, after hitting me 3 times, probably took away 80 to 85% of my health just from 3 basics. No abilities, no nothing. And so as a tank, I was useless. And there was also a Cabrakan on my team who was like mainly health, and he suffered the same issue in that, okay, well, Reaver is so powerful that it basically makes it so that if you build pure HP tanks, which I honestly wouldn't expect most people to, but if you build, say, the HP items that have tank, like for instance, Shield of Phoenix, Glad Shield, Phoenix Feather, Hide, there's a whole bunch of them. When you build HP tanks, even if you have prots or not, Reaver and Kins are so powerful right now as anti-tanks that on top of the pen issues, there are no late game tanks. And right now, the only answer that most tanks have, if they're lucky, is they have to buy Prophetic, Onis, they have to buy Dwarven, and then the other 3 items that they might have to buy or get in their build is Berserkers, Freyas, and Draconic Skill. And this is another thing that Deathwalker talks about with items that give percentile increases, like for instance, Draconic. The highest I've been able to make my protections go in a game is on Cabrakan. I went to 625 physical and 615 magical. And That was with all of these absolutely capped out everything. Even with a 600 HP, tank or a 600 prot, if you use the items I'm talking about here earlier, you've effectively taken them from 600 down to 300, and then because you have 35% pen, that essentially takes them from 300 down to 200, and that's assuming there's no other additional things like Osworn, or for instance Horus or Sylvanas or Guan Yu or Cerberus Prot Shred on top of that. So right now, late game tanks, even if they just build full damage, like completely selfishly, have zero counterplay late game. And obviously ADCs should counter tanks late game to an extent. However, it shouldn't be a cakewalk. It shouldn't literally just be, I hit you with 3 autos and you're dead. No. That should be when you face squishies, you hit them with, 2, 3 autos and an ability and they're dead. Like a late game damager should do that, or you can just be something like late game Kali, hit them with a Phoenix or a Blinking Abyss, hit them with an ability and knock them out because, you just have crazy damage. But with tanks, it shouldn't be that way. And I do have great tank games, don't get me wrong. However, when a person knows what to build, like a competent player knows what to build, which is what you see in deity games, demigod and deity games, you can just go look online. You can look at Inter, you can look at Snatty, Bayroni, Weekend, etc. You can go watch their games and you'll see that basically all the tanks build the same, like 3 or 4 items. All of the ADCs build the same 3 or 4 items. All of the mages basically build the same exact, like all 6 items. The only thing that maybe changes their starter. And solo laners are just kind of fucked. So right now, the issue is not that tanks can't get tanky. Like, for instance, as I was saying, they can get 600 plus prots. The problem is that the prot shred in the game is way too powerful. And if you try and go the opposite way with health, the anti-health items like Reaver and Kins are a little too powerful. So I think that overall, I think that these 2 items need to be nerfed a little bit, which I hate saying because I actually really... Reaver is my favorite damage item to buy on most of my gods. But these need to be nerfed. The prot shred on this needs to be nerfed and so on and so forth. And they're coming out with a patch in OB38 that's primarily focused on penetration. So we'll have to see what they're doing there. But yeah, that's my thoughts when it comes to itemization, is just simply that it's not that tanks can't get tanky. It's that damagers are so overwhelmingly anti-tank that it doesn't matter. Okay, so for the gameplay issues that Deathwalker talks about, he already covers the item descriptions I'm talking about. I don't agree with a lot of his takes in the gameplay issues part. I will say that it is pretty well known that the when you're in a game and you look at the amount of damage you've taken or dealt, the numbers are kind of all over the place. They don't do a really good job at showing them. He's talking about anti-heal. Okay, so anti-heal is a really big thing in this game right now that I am astounded people think is weak. So, in the game currently, I'll just pull up Guan Yu. Okay, that's a weird bug. So, in the game currently, Guan Yu is probably the strongest healer, especially with his aspect. The game, from when it started to now, already decreased overall prot and power items by a lot. What they also did on top of that is they nerfed healing in the game by roughly 40 to 60%. So for instance, in SMITE 1, I forget the exact number, but it's in between 200 and 250 is the total heal. And on top of this, it scales with your physical power in Smite 1. In this game, it is I don't know the exact number, but let's just say it was 200. So it's 50 less, which is around 30% weaker. Okay? So we've already had nerfs to everything. Like if I go to Afro, where's Afro? Afro right there. Okay. Afro with her ticks, and it doesn't actually show you how many ticks there are. Another thing that they need to do. 22 a tick. 22. On a single god other than yourself if you're lucky. Sylvanas. 16. Obviously, he can do a big AoE, and it can do damage. Really weak. The only real strong burst healer, I think, in the game right now is Horus. However, they already nerfed him a teeny bit, and they reduced his protection buff by 2, I think. This is by 2, and this is by 10. But when it comes to items in the game, I think there's an anti-heal thing in here. Yeah. So when it comes to anti-heal in here, you can see there's not a lot. And what they've done is they've effectively capped anti-heal at roughly 25% for items. They haven't capped this for god kits. Like, for instance, Odin applies 0 healing, 0 health regen in his ult. Cerberus applies, I think it's like 40%. It scales with his level. Artio has anti-heal as well. The fact that there's so much already like reduced healing in the game, when people complain about healing, I'm laughing at them. Because in a game where, say you buy brawlers and you're playing with a god that has anti-heal, you can basically get rid of close to 50 to 60% of that god's healing if you just combine those two things. On top of the god healing already being weaker, but let's just be generous and say 40%. So if you take 0.6, 40% weaker, and you multiply that by 0.75, you get roughly 0.43. So right now, compared to if we were just to have kept, in a generous amount, this is the generous one, healing is roughly, with just one damage or damage anti-heal item, or even tank anti-heal item, with any amount of help, you're looking at 40% healing at this point. So when people talk to me about we need more anti-heal, it's nothing too crazy. No, we don't. You're full of shit, and I disagree with you. There is no reason to say that. If anything, I think actually Stygian got this right. I 100% agree with 5% healing echo. I think healing echo should be a really big thing. And I think what it should do is it should allow a permanent over omni shield, not just a specific shield like Artio Aspect does physical, Achilles is physical. It should be like Geb's shield and like Odin's shield in that it affects all damage sources, not just one. And it should stay there permanently, and it should be a new stat thing called Heal Echo. They should actually completely remove healing reduction, in my opinion. They should completely replace it with Heal Echo, because there's already a blanket 40 to 60% anti-heal in the game. Now, if we start getting some crazy amounts of healing in the game, which I don't think we have, apart from Guan and maybe Horus, then we might be able to start talking about certain things. But if we went back to Smite 1 standards in terms of healing, we're nowhere near what Hell can do, not even close. The Afro healing compared to what it is now, from Smite 1 to now, is laughable. It's hysterically laughable. So when people talk about anti-heal, I just disagree with them completely, because I mainline healers, and I want to say 2/3 of my entire game time in both Smite 1 and Smite 2 are on healers. This is an interesting one. Deathwalker talks about the skill floor being too high and the skill ceiling being too low. So the difference between Smite 1 and Smite 2 is there's a lot of mechanics that are roughly the same, but there are some that are different. So for instance, protections are no longer capped at 325. Cooldown is no longer capped, but it follows a different formula, which is now the same formula that protections do. So for instance, 25 cooldown rate is 20% CDR, and 67 cooldown rate is 40% CDR, and if you want 50%, you have to do 100. So it's an exponential amount, and Intersect did a beautiful video showing that it makes it so that as you increase exponentially, it provides a linear increase in terms of number of ability used. That's an older video. I'm not going to go find that or whatever. But in terms of skill floor, I would say that I don't mind the skill floor being too high because there are a lot of gods. Like, for instance, if I go to Neith, who's a character that I barely ever play. I think I have maybe 2 games on her. But, you know, people play her all the time. This god is very simple. Very, very simple. You shoot an arrow that stuns people. You have a AoE heal / damage thing. You have a backflip that can potentially root people if they hit things on the ground. And you have an ult that can go across the map that charges for a short delay. And your passive is essentially the thing about weaves. So there are various gods that are dumb simple. Like Thanatos is simple, Sol is simple, Ymir is simple, Zeus is simple. Let's see, who's another simple one? Janus is probably the easiest mage in the entire game. Hard to hit his abilities if you want to talk about like high level, but easiest floor. Maybe other than Cuckoo. They both suffer from the same issue that their ult is harder to hit than other ones. Let's see. Geb easy, Cerberus easy, Bacchus is easy, Athena's easy. Ares is probably the easiest of all the tanks. Guan Yu is literally a bot farm healer with a little bit of prot shed. If people spend, you know, the time to learn the gods in the game, you know, and their aspects, they should be able to have a somewhat competent, you know, skill floor. Like a decent noob, you know, may not know immediately, you know, what does a Yorm do? Why did he disappear? You know, obviously some noobs will say that. But once you get to, you know, say somewhere in the range of 50 to 250 matches, people should know what to expect of the game modes that they play. Whether that's Conquest, Assault, Joust, Slash, Domination, Odin's Onslaught, you name it. So, in terms of the skill floor being too high, I actually don't mind it because it basically forces you to struggle through like learning something somewhat easy at the bottom level. Obviously, there are harder gods like Awilix, Agni. Sylvanas is definitely the hardest tank to play. Loki and almost all the assassins are hard to play, so on and so forth. In terms of skill ceiling, I disagree with Deathwalker saying the skill ceiling is too low. So I don't know what he means by this because he honestly didn't elaborate much on this. But the skill ceiling in the game it's hard to quantify because every game mode has a different game sense. And I get made fun of this every single time I play this, or every time I say this, in that because I'm an arena main since Season 8, that my game sense is currently in arena, and the other game mode that I used to play a lot was Slash, or Clash, or Siege. So those are my 2 big, I know what the game sense is, I don't have to really pay attention. So when I go into Conquest, and I go into Joust, and I go into Assault, those have totally different play styles because they play differently. They're slower, or they're faster, or they have different mechanics. Like, if you tried to play Assault like you play Conquest, your game would be horrible. It would be horrible. And if you tried to play Arena like you play Conquest, you get shit on. And in fact, this is actually what happened. To give an example, one of my friends was in a party and one guy forgot to pick a god. And if you didn't know this, when you have to do that low priority queue thing, the game or however many that you have to sit through, you have to not play ranked. So they've queued an arena, and I joined the game. And the guy who didn't pick the god, surprisingly enough, picked Atlas, this guy right here, this tank, and he went 0-19. Because what he did is he bought conquest items, and he tried to play somewhat like a support babysitting someone, and you can't do that in arena. You can't do it. And so he had no protections until the very end of the game, and he suffered for it. And I don't even think he actually finished at level 20. I think he finished at level 18. And so that's kind of like a really easy example I could think of different game modes, have different game sense, have different play styles. So skill ceilings in different game modes are totally different. So one big thing that some of my friends will say is that there are a lot of people who are in the higher ranks of Rank Conquest who don't deserve to be there. And I don't think most people who play Rank Conquest will disagree with that. And even myself, as someone who hasn't played a lot of SMITE 2 Rank Conquest, like I think I have like 33 matches or something on it, and I'm in gold. When you see a lot of the games of higher level people, I'm just going to use Snatty as an example. A lot of the people I see Snatty play against, these people look like they don't know what they're doing. Like it's hysterical. Usually there's one or two people on every team, regardless of rank, that just for some reason have put on retard mode and are playing the game without their team, without objectives in mind, selfishly, and are tunnel visioning. That's not the right word. And have tunnel vision. And so they don't farm correctly, they get farmed, they play away from their team, and overall they're just basically an anchor that most likely will cause the team to lose. And this happens in every game mode, not just Conquest, but it most affects Conquest because that's probably the easiest one that we can go find videos of and so on and so forth. So when Deathwalker talks about skill ceiling too low, I don't really know what he means because it's very obvious who knows what they're doing in every game mode. And sure, I'll get hate every single time I say that I'm an arena main, and of the, I want to say I have like 1,800 maybe matches in SMITE 2. I have 1,500 hours in the game. Of that, it's very apparent when you go into jousts, when you go into conquests, when you go into arena, who knows what's what. Like I'm not the best Conquest player anymore. I used to play Conquest all the time. I played it from season 1 to season 8. I took it a little more seriously season 4 to season 4 to season 8, and then I haven't really played it at all since then. And now that I'm in SMITE 2, what's probably going to happen is I'll just wait till the next split and I'll do my grinding thing because there's no point in just, grinding and then getting immediately reset back. But I think this point stands still that the skill ceiling being too low, I don't agree with. Like if he's talking about there are people in certain ranks that don't deserve to be there, sure. Yeah. That's just an inherent weakness in the SR inflation isn't the right term, but the amount of SR you get per game is, in my opinion, and in many other content creators, too high. One thing that I know Weekend had said in a video, I don't even think it's a month ago, he basically said it should be more like Predecessor in that in SMITE right now, you get roughly 60 to 65 for a win, and you lose 50 to 60 on a loss. In Predecessor, you gain 20 to 30 on a win, and you lose 15 to 20 on a loss. And so the grind is almost half of what it is, or the grind is almost half as quick as it is in SMITE, or SMITE 2 to be more specific. So that might help the case. However, the way the system works is, it just rewards inherent effort. So if somebody can have, a baseline minimal win-loss ratio. They'll eventually grind their way up, say after 1,000 matches, if someone actually goes and does it. Like, for instance, there are a couple people that I know that I'm not going to name who have 2.5 to 3.5 thousand ranked conquest matches, and they have barely reached demigod. They're in between 5,000 and 5,200. But they got there, and they did it in that, split time, but that's also their full-time job, and so they can afford to do that. But if that's what he's talking about for skill ceiling, I can agree with that. Moving on to the next thing where Deathwalker's talking about a confused game identity and overall characters kind of being like free roaming in terms of their role. I can kind of agree here. So the big difference between Smite 1 and Smite 2 is Smite 1 gods were more engineered for 1 or 2 roles. And if they did anything outside of those 2 roles, it was basically expected that you would do very average or poorly. Like, for instance, Camazot can't really play support. Can't do that. He could play jungle. He could play solo. If you're crazy, he can play mid and support. If you're crazy, he can do it. But in this game, what they've essentially tried to do with the base god kits and with the aspects is they've tried to make it so that most gods can play all of the roles. So, for instance, Sylvanas is typically played as a support. However, he can be played as a solo laner, and his aspect is specifically for solo lane as well. You can play him with his aspect as an ADC. You can play him normally as full power mage. However, that's not the best thing you can do. You can play him rather successfully as a jungler, as Elion has shown, and that's most of his videos with Sylvanas as him as a jungler. But most gods are like this, where they try and emphasize this. Like, for instance, Horus, solo laner and support. His aspect is specifically a jungle-focused, assassin-ish type aspect. Amma changes her from a solo laner to more of a super heavy damage focused solo laner to a assassin with her aspect, because it basically just is a giant stab boost. So when it comes to the overall game identity, it used to be that each role was pretty much in its own lane, and that's why you could go in here and you could go through all of the roles and you'd be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now they've kind of muddled it all up and they've made it so that certain things can kind of just go everywhere. And then they have weird interactions, like for instance on Bacchus 2, his leap, it scales off of protections. So if you inherently play this without the aspect, which changes your 1, you just inherently are weaker. You can build all of the strength intelligence you want, but your 2 won't essentially do... Okay, well, there is strength on it, but the fact that you're not having any protections when you're playing it, it basically makes it so that his 2 is just gone. Osiris is another case of this, where his sickle, you have a little bit of strength, but it has protection scaling. So when you play certain gods, their role, their identity is very clear. And Hi-Rez has kind of messed around with that to a good extent. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like how they have slightly widened it to an extent that's very clear. Like, for instance, Hunbats can be now played very, very effectively as a bruiser with his aspect on, because it now has CC, unlike the non-aspect, which is just damage with a little bit of a slow. So, if that's what Deathwalker's talking about, so be it. Overall, most of my conclusions are the same as Deathwalker's. I still enjoy Smite 2. I will say that there are a lot of items that need to be ported over in some way, and some that needed to be fixed in Smite 2. But overall, I really don't like playing Smite 1 compared to Smite 2, given how many mechanical changes they made. I am also excited for Smite 2's future. I think that given what we have seen them put out at such a steady pace, it does show that they're committed to, you know, growth and so on and so forth. I've been making more YouTube videos in the past couple of months than I probably have in my entire channel's history, and that's because I actually have videos recorded that I care about and I like, and I don't feel ashamed of publishing, just because a lot of Smite 1 content is so boring in comparison to Smite 2 content for me, at least in my opinion. Just one last note on items. Obviously, there's going to be a big shift for Smite 2 once they get the majority of all gods. To be fair, they already have 80-something gods in the game now, and they already have however many aspects, so there's actually more available gods in the game if you count aspects as a god in the game than in Smite 1. However, there are certain items and certain item characteristics. I don't know what you want to call them. For instance, like movement speed. In this game, they have done their damnedest to make it so that very few items have movement speed or movement speed reduction. To my knowledge, there are 2 items, which I think are Pharaoh's Curse and Gem of Isolation, which reduce speed. And there are the pathfinding items for movement speed, and then there are a couple. I think the starter item for War Flag and War Banner have movement speed on them. But they have messed with items like Midgardian Mail, where the bigger portion of its passive was the movement speed reduction. And that was a really, really big reason people bought it. So that if a hunter hit you a couple of times, even inadvertently, that they couldn't run from you even with a dash, because as soon as they dashed, they were just sitting there. And so it added an extra CC to certain, you know, frontliners or zone control bruisers, like say Achilles or Herc, to their kit, and now their items can't do that. And then there are other tank items like Curse Weather. There are bruiser items like Ethereal Staff that are not in the game, like Phalanx that are not in the game, like Cannonier's Cuirass, and so on and so forth. So I think once they finish porting all the gods, obviously the next big thing is going to be items, and then potentially the map changes or game mode changes. But I think that's about all I have to say on the current state of Smite that I care about, because you can go find most of other people talking about certain roles like solo lane, mid, jungle, ADC, support. There are other videos about that, but I just want to talk about the things that I can concretely say that are just, there's no excuse for, and certain things that in the community like anti-heal that I just completely disagree with. And I just want to put my thoughts out there. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them.